Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and today is a very special crossover episode with Ebony Vines and Pamela Shandrow of the Theatre Geeks Anonymous podcast. We talk about 3 short-running musicals that were all filmed live: At the Drop of a Hat, starring Flanders and Swann; Showgirl, starring Carol Channing; and Allegiance, starring George Takei, Telly Leung, and Lea Salonga. My thanks to Ebony and Pamela for having me on the show, and to Pamela for editing this very fun episode. I hope you enjoy.
It's been a day.
It has.
We're going to have an exciting next couple of hours.
I think so. It's a case of the Mondays, but not too bad. Not too bad.
No, not terrible. It's beautiful outside. It is like fall weather perfection.
So good.
Not quite raining, but it's supposed to later.
And we did our annual apple picking trip, which 2 weekends ago already.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Can you believe?
It's so good. It was so fun. It was the perfect weather.
Yes.
We had these golden delicious that were the size of babies' heads. I was not disappointed like I was last year.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about that because there were very few apples, and the ones that were there that I tried were not fantastic. Like there were 2 maybe from the trees that were like, okay, this is worth picking.
Yeah.
And I left with half a bag, Ebony. I'm used to like stuffing that thing so full.
I know.
But not last year, but this year.
We really did really well. I made apple butter and I still have a fulfillion apples left. And so I guess I'm gonna have to make more or something. I don't know, because there's so many and I'm not gonna finish them all. But yeah, we had a really great trip this year. So y'all will see that reel for this year on Instagram pretty soon. Well, geeks, today, I'm very excited to share with you that we have a special guest, and her name is Luisa Lyons, and she is doing the world a great service by creating a website called Filmed Live Musicals. So a bunch of the shows we talked about, you can actually see because she's got a database for where you can see them.
And you don't have to be in New York City to do it. You can do it from your home in Alaska. Mm-hmm. You could do it from Nova Scotia or Iceland, anywhere you have internet access.
If this was a thing when we were kids, Pamela, do you know how annoying we would be?
Yes, I do. In fact, no. Well, as much of an annoying little, just bossy theater brat I was after watching like the Tony Awards week for Rosie O'Donnell show.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Come on. And that was just like one song from each show. So imagine if I had had access to the entire musical. Well, and though I did have access to some whole musicals because like Les Mis came out. You could buy it off of PBS, the concert version. So I definitely had that. And I had Into the Woods, starring Bernadette Peters, our beloved.
Right.
Yes, and I had those VHS tapes.
But this is like that on steroids.
Completely.
I mean, just the most obnoxious to small children in the world.
You know what, though? There's still time. We can still be obnoxious.
Now we're just going to be grown obnoxious theater geeks because now we know where to watch everything. So right now, I want to welcome Luisa Lyons into the conversation. Welcome, Luisa.
Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, that's so fun to hear you nerd out and be excited about the website. And there's a part of my brain that's like, yes, there's so many shows on there, but I have a back catalog of like it's now grown to nearly 600 that I still have to add. And I have all this anxiety about like, I've got to get them up there so that people can find them.
Well, if you do it over the next couple of months, people will have enough videos to watch in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
It's
plenty. Yep.
It's a lifetime of work. Oh my God.
Oh, I can't wait. Oh, 600. My
So
little
good.
theater heart is melting.
And like we are living in this unprecedented age of releases being made available. Like
Yeah.
in the next few months alone, we have Waitress, Titanic, Spring Awakening is currently available in the UK. Prince of Egypt is coming out. Aladdin hasn't announced yet, but it's definitely coming out soon. And when I first started the site, we were lucky to have like one pro shot a year. And now, you know,
Wow.
like 5 in a few months is just like we are living in the golden age, my friends.
That's awesome.
Wow. That's
There has
cool.
definitely been a lot of gatekeeping in the Broadway world.
Yeah.
And I think actually maybe the pandemic did us a favor because it allowed us to have a reason to record and put out these Broadway shows.
It's definitely shifting the needle, and what's really interesting to me is a lot of shows are being filmed in the UK and not on Broadway. So like Kinky Boots, King and I, Waitress was filmed here, filmed in New York. But Aladdin and Prince of Egypt were both filmed in the West End. Just there are lots of legalities and union restrictions that make it easier and cheaper to film in the UK than in the US.
Sure.
Yeah, because they, they have NT Live, which is like so easy. You know, I watched so much of that in 2020 when we were all in lockdown. And, you know, being able to go to theaters and see their shows, like movie theaters, I think, you know, I feel like we're just getting into that, you know, like opera was there before, you know, musical theater was. And of course we had like great performances growing up, like when we were kids, to be able to watch certain things. But you're right. It's like, it feels like definitely with the US, it's been a lot slower, but since 2020, it's been picking up a lot. And, you know, it's like my niece and nephew, the two oldest, my younger brother has 7, and they all like musicals. The 2 oldest ones, especially the oldest one, like she really loves musicals. And so they all got to see my favorite, which is Hamilton, in 2020. So now everybody knows all the words, and I'm like, this is what I've always wanted.
This is how the world should be.
Yes. Yes. So I just, it makes me so happy to see, you know, kids being able to also, like, no matter where they live, no matter their economic status, be able to have more access to the theater in this way.
Yeah. Yes, and what I also love, it's not just Broadway in the West End. There are productions from Australia and Canada and Mexico and the Philippines and like the United Kingdom. There's stuff from all over the world, and as we'll get into, like also historically, the database dates all the way back to 1938, and sadly, those early captures aren't available because they didn't have the technology at that time to record live broadcasts, but there is stuff like Showgirl from 1968 was filmed, and so there's historical content as well. It's not just what's currently playing. I love that too.
And Showgirl is one of the shows we're doing today. I'm doing that one.
Oh,
so
yay.
I'm really excited. Really excited to talk about that. Yeah. It's really wonderful.
Yeah.
All right.
Did we also want to introduce each other for each other's listeners?
That's right. Yes. Okay. So you all, Film Live Musicals is not only a database and a place to be able to watch shows, but it's also a podcast. So Luisa, will you just tell people a little bit about your podcast, please?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, filmlivemusicals.com is a database of stage shows. Unfortunately, you can't watch them on the site. But there are links where possible where to watch them, and it includes like a history of the show, where it was filmed, who filmed it, why they filmed it, and then where possible where you can watch it. And then the podcast is where I interview the people behind the scenes who make the musical. So I've had directors, producers, writers, actors, all kinds of people from who make the musicals happen, and comes out every 2 weeks and available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Amazing. Awesome. And Theatre Geeks Anonymous, Pamela and I have been doing since 2017, and we've been on the Broadway Podcast Network since 2020. And Our show is about Broadway flops, scandals, and new work. So we talk about shows that didn't find an audience, musical misfires, things like that. We also introduce new shows. We're going to introduce the team from a new musical called Hereville, which is based on a graphic novel. We're very excited about that.
Yeah,
And
very.
we also talk about work that's, coming to Broadway, off Broadway as well in our intermission sodes. So, and also we're everywhere that you can listen to a podcast as well.
We're everywhere.
Everywhere. So I think what we should do now is we should each introduce the shows that we're doing, and then Luisa's going to go first with her show.
If you don't mind, I can start right now.
Yep.
I am going to do one I actually have seen on Broadway because I don't get to see a lot of shows on Broadway, even though I am in close proximity to them. I'm going to do Allegiance, the musical.
I'm doing Showgirl, which Luisa mentioned.
And I'm doing At the Drop of a Hat by Michael Flanders and Donald Swann.
Okay. So Luisa, take it away. We're very excited about this show.
Fabulous. So At the Drop of the Hat, so Michael Flanders, or Flanders as he pronounces it, and Donald Swann were a British comedic duo. And they described themselves as confectioners, not butchers. They took topics of the day and kind of riffed on it in a as I was rewatching it recently, it reminded me of like SNL, like in that they or a kind of a Tim Minchin style of comedy where like you talk about something topical and then you sing a song about it. Very sketch review comedy in style. And they met at school in the UK at the I'm blanking on the name of the school that they went to, but later people who went there included a little known composer, Lloyd Webber, and Helena Bonham Carter also went to that school. And they started out doing reviews at school, and then they were doing a performance with another artist where the other person would kind of give lectures on relevant topics, and then Flanders and Swann would write music and perform songs, and then the third person became unavailable, and someone suggested, why don't you just do your songs? And they did, and it was a huge hit, and they ended up performing in the off West End at a little theater called the New Lindsay, which has since been demolished. And the show was hugely successful. It's called At the Drop of a Hat, and it was a collection of their songs. And it ended up transferring to the West End, where it played for 2 years, and the royal family came to visit. It was a hugely successful, immensely popular show at the Fortune Theatre, where Operation Mincemeat is currently playing. I loved that connection, having recently seen Operation Mincemeat and absolutely loved it. Please film it. Please bring it to New York.
Okay, this is like a little tangent, but like, how long is it playing there?
Operation Mincemeat?
Yeah.
They believe they just extended, so it's going into 2024. I can't remember the extension date, but
and that's in London.
Yes, at the Fortune Theatre.
Okay, because I'm going in December, so now I'm gonna like mark that.
Okay, you absolutely have to go to Operation Mincemeat.
Okay, Operation Mincemeat.
Hysterically funny British musical. It's all original, tip of the hat to Hamilton and Six in its style, but it's brilliant. Absolutely
awesome.
Brilliant. Yeah, highly recommend it.
So exciting. Okay, cool.
So back to At the Drop of a Hat. It transferred to the West End, and then Alexander Cohen, who's a Broadway producer and had quite a reputation, brought the show to Broadway. And it wasn't quite as successful as it had been in London, but it had great reviews. And it ran for 216 performances at the Golden.
Oh,
and then
that's not bad at all.
No, very, very respectable run. And then they toured the US after the Broadway performance. And then in 1962, it was filmed for a short-lived television program called The Festival of the Performing Arts, which was sponsored by New Jersey Standard Oil. And to make this film happen was like this huge negotiation. And there were, pardon me, letters back and forth across the Atlantic about Flanders and Swann were really nervous about filming the show. They were scared that it would cannibalize ticket sales. They were worried about how it would affect the tour. They were worried.
We're having that same conversation today.
Yes.
Yeah. Imagine that the same questions, the same issues keep popping up over and over and over again. And in fact, they were nervous about releasing even a recording, like an audio recording of their shows. George Martin had approached them to do an audio recording, like a record, when they were in the West End. And at first they didn't want to, because they were scared that people wouldn't come see their shows if they could access their music in a recording, which is something that happened with cast recordings as well. That
well, goodness, thank goodness they did, though, ultimately, because I do see that there were recordings made on the internet. Correct?
That's right.
The entire album then on that cast recording.
Yes, I believe that album is still available, that original, that West End recording. But they filmed a special performance for the Festival of the Performing Arts, lost my ability to speak. Festival of the Performing Arts, not arse, which I'm sure they would have appreciated in his humor. And the program was broadcast on just in New York and New Jersey initially, and Washington, D.C. And then it was so popular that it was rolled out across the country. And it was really well received. The critics thought that it was like quite British in its humor, but that that people would enjoy being able to see this kind of rare comedic duo on television. And it's part of this in early television that they used Broadway acts and live performance to fill content that was like considered to be high cultural content, that it was something that it was important for television to disseminate, was to be able to bring culture to the masses. And this was part of that drive.
Cool.
That's amazing. I also like the British humor thing. It's like, well, their humor is amazing. So
it is. That's what I preferred when I was growing up.
So great. And what's really interesting is that their sequel, at the drop of another hat, was filmed at the end of their so by the time they'd done the sequel, they had been performing together for 11 years. They toured the world, immensely successful, popular duo. And they said at the end of the Broadway run of At the Drop of Another Hat that they were done. They were done. They were tired. They were kind of the run had come to an end. And it's widely reported that the Broadway performance was their last performance together, but they actually came together in like a few months later, a month later, to record at what had been newly named the Ed Sullivan Theatre. And that was actually their last performance together, and it was an especially invited audience of British expats, and it was made up of a British audience, because they wanted a response that would they wanted a warm response to their humor.
Yeah, totally.
And they were very insistent that it not be broadcast in the UK. They didn't want sales of their albums and things to be affected by the television broadcast. It ended up being broadcast, and that is the video that is now available on YouTube. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, I've not been able to find somewhere that has a recording of the original show. I would love to go over to the UK and see if maybe there's a recording still in existence there, but I've looked at the Paley Center here, and it doesn't seem that there is an existing recording, but there is a bootleg on YouTube of the A Drop of Another Hat.
Amazing.
That's
amazing.
Awesome. Do you happen to know what they both did individually after all of the performing was done?
Yes. Donald Swann went on to, he continued composing. He worked a lot, if I'm remembering, Egypt or somewhere not in the UK, Cyprus maybe. He had served there during World War II in the ambulance corps, and he fell in love with the culture and the music there. So he ended up living there. And unfortunately, Michael Flanders, kind of shortly after, he worked in broadcasting, but he passed away suddenly from a brain hemorrhage in, I think it was like 1975.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's too bad.
That's so sad.
Yeah, but they continue, like a lot of British folks like still remember their names. If you bring up their names, they were like household names, and their music was like incredibly popular and very well known. And a lot of like, especially older folks have a very fond memory of these two. And like all the accounts of these guys, like they were by all reports like extremely warm and like friendly and lovable and like very kind human beings. And something that I should add about Michael Flanders that's super super important to me is that he used a wheelchair. He contracted polio when he was a young man and spent a lot of time in hospital and ended up using a wheelchair. And the difficulties that he faced in being on stage, he couldn't access the dressing room. Like they had to build him a special like curtained off area on the side of the stage. And Donald Swann talks about in his autobiography about how they were very conscious that other people with disabilities couldn't come to their shows. And I think about oh gosh, what's her name? From Oklahoma.
Ali
Stroker.
Stroker.
Yes. That, there was all this talk about her being the first person on Broadway in a wheelchair. And I was like, actually, 60 years before we had Michael Flanders, who, in the 60s was navigating being on Broadway in a wheelchair. And such a big deal that like he was on prime, like on these two television specials that were broadcast across the US, and eventually they were broadcast in the UK as well, and possibly Australia, because they were very popular in Australia too. To have that representation, and it's like when you read the reviews, the horrible, like the ableist language used, like one reviewer even said like if he would have gotten out of his chair if he could have, kind of thing, like he should have. And it's like, the dude had polio. Like it's really infuriating, but to have that representation at that time is unbelievable. Like you just didn't see it. So
because
I
he
think that's
wasn't
really
the only
important to
person
mention.
that got polio. A huge swath of a whole generation were inflicted with polio, and not all of them died. So it's really interesting to me that they were able to kind of overlook that.
Yeah. And how many performers do we see with visible disabilities on stage? Like it doesn't happen. It's so rare. And it's happening more and more now, but especially in 1962 when this first aired, I can imagine he may have been one of the first.
That's amazing. I love that. Well, I think, do you want me to go next? I can go next.
Yeah, go for it.
My only thing is the dogs sound quiet right now.
I know. Oh, do you want me to? Yeah, I'll do mine first, only because you're right.
I'm like, they're quiet, and
then I can sit on the mute button for the last one. Okay, yeah, perfect. All right, so to save our wonderful audience to having to listen to my dog's part, we are going to change
Doggies forever.
And we're going to skip ahead to Allegiance, the musical. My resources for this one are Wikipedia, of course, LinkedIn, which is a strange one to find stuff on, but there you have it, and a website called resistors.com. All right, so Allegiance is a musical with music and lyrics by Jay Kuo and a book by Mark Aceto, Jay Kuo, and Lorenzo Tione. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing any of those last names. The story is set during the Japanese-American internment of World War II, with a framing story set in present day, and was inspired by the personal experiences of George Takei, who stars in the musical. Jay Kuo, who wrote book, music, and lyrics, I couldn't find much, but he has a LinkedIn profile, so this is where that comes into play. Here is what he wrote about himself. I am the CEO and founder of The Social Edge, a social media and digital publishing company based in New York City. I'm also a composer, lyricist, and playwright. My show Allegiance, a story of love, loss, and heroism during the Japanese-American internment, starring George Takei and Lea Salonga, opened in the fall of 2015 and had its LA premiere in 2018, Tokyo premiere in March 2021, London in January of 2022. I am a two-time Tony-winning Broadway co-producer for Hadestown and The Inheritance. My background is in law. I'm an appellate litigator admitted to practice in California, the Ninth Circuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court. So I'm thinking that guy, I know, it's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mark Aceto, who wrote the book, in 2012, Aceto won the Charles MacArthur Award for Outstanding New Play for Birds of a Feather, which is a comedy inspired by Roy and Silo, the same-sex male penguins in Central Park, who raised a chick. Also in 2012, I could have gone into so much more detail about that than I wanted to, but I was like, nope, I gotta get back to musical theater. Also in 2012, Aceto turned his novel, How I Paid for College, into a one-man monologue with songs. That premiered at the Hub Theater in Fairfax, Virginia. In 2014, his musical adaptation of E.M. Forster's A Room with a View was presented in Seattle at the Fifth Avenue Theater. In 2015, Aceto wrote the concert adaptation of Lerner and Loewe's Paint Your Wagon for New York City Center's Encore series. He is currently working on the libretto for a new musical commissioned by the Fifth Avenue Theater. The musical Dutch Master was awarded a development grant by the National Alliance for Musical Theater. And also in the works is Chasing Rainbows, which is a musical based on the early childhood of Judy Garland, which premiered in December of 2015 at Flat Rock Playhouse in North Carolina. Last but not least in the writing team, Lorenzo Tione, who also co-wrote the book. His LinkedIn says, Lorenzo Tione is managing director at Gaingels, I think is how you say it. It's spelled Gain, like gain weight, GELS. So Gaingels.com, a venture investment group based in NYC focused on investing and supporting LGBT plus founded and led startups. He is also the managing producer of Sing Out Louise Productions and the co-founder and president of The Social Edge. In addition to his work as an entrepreneur, technologist, and venture investor, that's hard to say, Lorenzo is the co-creator, co-book writer, and the lead producer of Allegiance, the 2015 Broadway musical starring George Takei and Lea Salonga. His producing credits include The Inheritance, Slave Play, Hadestown, which won the Tony Award, Share Show, the new one, Catch Me If You Can, which had the Tony nomination, and American Idiot. Additional IMDb credits, George Takei's Alliance, director, executive producer, Bandstand, The Boys Are Back, he was the director and executive producer, and Allegiance to Broadway as the executive producer. The development of Allegiance the musical began in 2008 and premiered in September 2012 in San Diego. It played on Broadway from October 2015 to February 2016. Reviews on Broadway were mixed, although the cast was generally praised. A revival followed in Los Angeles in 2018, but before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'd like to do a quick recap of what the Japanese-American internment was. During World War II, the United States forcibly relocated and incarcerated at least 125,000 people of Japanese descent in 75 identified incarceration sites. Most were sent to the camps on the Pacific Coast and the western interior of the country. Approximately 2/3 of the inmates were United States citizens. These actions were initiated by President Franklin D. Roosevelt via Executive Order 9066, following Imperial Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Essentially, the president didn't think that they could trust the motivations of Asians in the US because they looked like the enemy. So even though these people lived here and they were, for all intents and purposes, American, the government thought it best to gather them up and ship them away to concentration camps and to keep them there until the war was over. This all happened between February 19th of 1942 and March 20th of 1946. But don't worry, because in the 80s, Reagan gave a pittance of restitution to the families affected.
That
Go
like
for it.
it's just so frustrating.
Yeah.
That when we talk about the greatest generation, I'm like, are they?
Well,
Are they?
who
Why
coined that
are we
term, though?
constantly trying to get back to making America like the 1940s? It was
Right.
so bad for so many people.
Yeah.
Why is this an aspiration?
Well, Ebony, because it wasn't bad for the people that are asking to get back to that.
I know that. I'm still pissed about it.
And you should. I think everyone should. This was like the Sparks Note version of a very highly condensed,
Yeah.
bit of information that I got off of Wikipedia. But if you're I'm talking to the audience now too, if you're at all interested in discovering more about this, like I would definitely encourage going on and doing like a good old fashioned deep dive, because there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there.
Can I
It's
just
all,
say
yeah.
I want to say one thing because
Yeah.
I don't remember learning much, if anything, about the Japanese internment when I was a kid in school.
Okay.
And so I have no idea. I could not tell you why I did this, but one day I was in the library at school and I think I had to pick a book for a book report. And I stumbled upon this book called Journey to Topaz. And this book was about this young girl who was forced to go into a Japanese internment camp. And that book is how I learned about this.
Wow.
I was about 12 or 13 years old. And that book is how I learned that this happened. And I was like, no one told me that we did this to people. Like my friends. No one told me we did this to them.
Yeah.
And
I didn't learn it in elementary or junior high, but I was very lucky to have Mrs. Pearson as my U.S. government and U.S. history teacher in both my junior and senior year. So one year I think was government, the next year was U.S. history. But like she was amazing at, first of all, throwing away the book and saying, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this by notes. I'm going to write everything on the board. You write it in a big notebook and then we'll take a big open book test, right? And it was the only time that I've, first of all, cared about getting, but also that I got an A in a class. So that was exciting. But she was very unapologetic about the information that she was sharing. And I think that is exactly what we need. And it's exactly what white people are fighting against right now as far as the school curriculum is concerned. Right.
Banning books means
Absolutely.
You're not educated. I mean, because
you're erasing an entire portion of US history that not only can we learn from and not repeat then, but also like it didn't do me any harm to learn that stuff.
Right.
I didn't feel badly about myself as an American white person learning that stuff, but it did give me compassion. It made me feel more empathetic toward the people that I would consider in the future enemy.
Yeah.
Does that it doesn't, I think what they're so afraid of teaching our young children about this stuff would mean is that then those children are going to grow up hating America and hating themselves and hating their ancestors. And I think that is so far from the actual case.
Yeah, it isn't true, but they're not giving children enough credit. But I think at the same time, like, I mean, I think we all know like what the actual impetus is and what is actually happening here is to create a much more like pro-white society, especially because like we're going into majority minority very quickly.
Right.
And, when a people group feels like they're not going to be on top anymore, then they're going to do whatever they can to try to still make, even if they become a minority, make themselves
feel important.
Yeah.
But there's also that nefarious underlying thing here too, which is the fear that because we treated people poorly when we were the majority, that once they become the majority, they will treat us as poorly or worse.
That's right.
Which again is not the case.
That's right.
Because we're giving all of those people no credit at all.
That's right.
All right, back to musical theater.
Okay.
But it is important that we have that conversation, because that's essentially what this musical is about.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then I think just to add to that, like why Allegiance is so important in that it's a real person's story, or
That's
based on
right.
it's not factual. Like the musical itself is a fictionalized account of a true story.
yes.
But it is. And speaking to Hamilton as well, that when George Takei saw Hamilton, he said, like, oh, I can tell, this gives me permission to tell my story. And it, like, he felt like that was super important to him, and how Jay Quo became involved in that, and their relationship, and how that led to Allegiance, which you can hear all about on the Film Live Musicals podcast with Jay Quo.
Amazing.
Mid-show plug, love it. So let's go ahead and talk first of all about the conception and the historical perspective, and we'll get into some of the motivation for the show, which is essentially what Luisa was just starting to kind of comment on. In the fall of 2008, George Takei and his husband Brad were coincidentally seated next to Jay Quo and Lorenzo Tione at an off-Broadway show, where a brief conversation revealed a common love of theater. The next day, the four were once again seated together at another Broadway show called In the Heights.
In the Heights.
And
I was In the Heights, not Hamilton.
Okay.
It's still Lin-Manuel Miranda.
But in intermission, Quo and Tione approached Takei, curious as to why he had been so emotionally affected by the father's song Inútil, or Useless, in which he laments about the inability to help his family. Over the course of that intermission, Takei recounted his personal experience of his father's sense of helplessness at his inability to protect his family that was mirrored in the song. Quo and Tione felt that Takei's family experience would make a great show. Although previous major Broadway musicals have involved Asian and Asian American topics or settings, including 3 Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, Pacific Overtures, and Miss Saigon, Allegiance is the first Broadway musical created by Asian Americans, directed by an Asian American, with a predominantly Asian cast and an Asian American viewpoint informing the work. So here is the synopsis. I'm going to talk fast because it's pretty long. Act 1. In 2001, aged World War II veteran Sam Kimura prepares for Pearl Harbor anniversary ceremony. A woman arrives and tells him that his estranged sister Keiko, known as Kay, has died. As Kay's executor, she gives Sam a packet and tells him the funeral will be held that afternoon. Angered by the opening of his old family wounds after nearly 60 years of estrangement, he berates his once beloved sister for not leaving him in peace. Kay's ghost informs Sam that she couldn't rest in peace without making one last attempt to reconnect with him. It is 1941, and Sammy is a newly elected class president who dreams of going places like college and high political office. His widowed father, Tatsuo, and grandfather, Kato, own a farm in Salinas, California. Sammy adores his older sister, Kay, who has postponed her dreams to help raise him. Tatsuo is always pushing Sammy to be better and reaching his potential, and Sammy believes that Tatsuo blames Sammy for his wife's death in childbirth. After the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor in December, the U.S. government fears Japanese Americans might be loyal to the Empire of Japan. Although Tatsuo advises his family to keep a low profile, Sammy volunteers for the military but is rejected as an enemy alien. Even as Japanese Americans in the Western U.S. are incarcerated in internment camps, Mike Masaoka, and please forgive me for these names, head of the Japanese American Citizens League, or the JACL, advises them to trust the U.S. government. Sammy's family sells their beautiful farm for a discounted price and are sent to the bleak Heart Mountain Relocation Center in Wyoming. There, Kay counsels patience. Tatsuo grimly accepts the events that led to internment. Sammy believes military service is the way to prove internees' patriotism and win their freedom. When Oji-chan becomes sick, Sammy asks the white Quaker volunteer nurse at the camp, Hannah, for cough syrup. She tells him it's only for staff, but Sammy persuades her to give him the medication. Sammy helps the JACL organize the camp to petition for concessions. And Hannah and Sammy begin a relationship that causes additional tensions between interracial marriage. Because interracial marriage is illegal. Tatsuo, outraged by the unjust loyalty questionnaire intended to identify disloyal Japanese, refuses to swear his allegiance to America, and against his father's wishes, Sammy continues to try to enlist. Oji-chan persuades Kei to go to the dance by insisting that mountains can be moved one stone at a time. Sammy and Hannah wish for a world where they could be together. Kei has fallen in love with the draft resistance leader. Frankie Suzuki is the one that Kei falls in love with.
Mm-hmm.
Masaoka and the JACL advise internees to swear allegiance on the loyalty questionnaire to avoid being separated from their families. Tatsuo is sent to the brutal prison for refusing, and Kei reflects on her dead mother and Sammy's childhood. The siblings choose diverging paths. Sammy will risk his life in military service while Kei joins the resistance, advocating for internees' rights. Act 2. Masaoka obtains permission for Japanese Americans to enlist, but only if they take the most dangerous assignments in Italy. Sammy enlists in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, an all-Nisei unit. Frankie pledges to resist the draft unless his family is freed. Sammy condemns Frankie as a draft dodger in an interview with Life magazine that trumpets Sammy's combat record. And Tatsuo is given a copy of the magazine and released from prison because of Sammy's actions. Kei and Frankie help lead the camp's resistance. Before Frankie is jailed, Hannah promises to help Kei with Frankie's freedom. Sammy sees Hannah while on leave, and before he leads a suicide mission, which kills most of his fellow soldiers. In camp, during a scuffle between Frankie and a military policeman, Hannah is accidentally and fatally shot. Oji-chan dies peacefully while tending his vegetable garden, and upon release, Frankie asks Kei to marry him. After the Enola Gay bombs in Hiroshima, America celebrates victory, and each internee is released and given $25 and a bus ticket. After the war, Sammy learns that Frankie and Kei have a daughter, Hanako, named after Hannah. Aghast, he confronts Tatsuo, who tells him that Frankie was the son that he always wanted. Already furious at Kei and Frankie for their role in the draft resistance, their involvement in Hannah's death is the final straw. He accepts a job in Washington offered by Masaoka. Kei argues with Sammy, calling him a coward for leaving. She tries to stop him, but only manages to tear the Purple Heart off of his uniform. Sammy bitterly insists that his sacrifice was worth losing his family. So now we're back in 2001. Sam opens the packet from Kei. Inside is the life issue featuring Sammy's exploits that Tatsuo had kept since the war. Sam attends Kei's funeral. Her executor tells him her mother wanted to give Sam something else and hands him his old Purple Heart medal. He realizes that the executor is his niece, Hanako. He breaks down, aware of this chance to forgive and to share in the love and compassion of his family. And that is the end of the show. So some of the productions that had occurred, Allegiance had its first reading at the Japanese American National Museum on July 13th, 2009, starring George Takei, Lea Salonga, and others. It was followed by 2 more readings that were held in New York in 2010 with the same 2, but this time they added Telly Leung, among others. In the summer of 2011, a workshop was held for Allegiance at the Old Globe Theatre in San Diego. To commemorate the Japanese American Day of Remembrance, the Memorial for Japanese American Internment, George Takei took to Facebook to initiate a crowdfunding campaign through Indiegogo to raise funds for the show. The initial target was $50,000. The eventual total raised exceeded $158,000. The musical premiered in September 2012 at the Old Globe, directed by Stafford Arima and choreographed by Andrew Palermo. It became the Old Globe's biggest box office success in history to help fund and publicize a Broadway run. To help fund and publicize a Broadway run, the producers sold Allegiance priority passes in 2014 for $5. The pass allowed people to buy tickets before they were available to the general public. I think that is brilliant. Back to the story. The Broadway production began previews on October 6, 2015 at the Longacre Theater and opened officially on November 8th, 2015 with the same cast and crew as in San Diego, except that Christopherin Nomura played Tatsuo, Katie Rose Clark was Hannah, Greg Watanabe was Mike. It closed on February 14th, 2016, after 37 previews and 111 regular performances. The Broadway cast album was released on January 29th, 2016. A filmed performance of the Broadway production was screened at roughly 600 movie theaters in North America in December of 2016, with encore screenings on the Japanese Day of Remembrance in February 2017. Additional screenings were held in 481 theaters on December 7th, 2017, to coincide with the anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attacks, and in Hawaii on December 7th and 9th, 2017. East-West Players collaborated with Los Angeles Japanese American Cultural and Community Center to mount the musical there in 2018, with Takei reprising his roles. 5 actors from the original Broadway production participated in the revival, but direction was by EWP's artistic director, Sonal Desai, with musical direction by Mark McAlintal and new choreography by Rumi Oyama. The producers created an interactive study guide about Japanese internment during World War II for educators and students. And then we go to the West End, off West End, which opened at the Charing Cross Theatre. Is that how you say that? Anyway.
Yes, Charing Cross.
Okay, thank you. In London in January 2023 for a 13-week limited engagement with Takei and Leung reprising their roles from the Broadway cast. It is directed and choreographed by Tara Overfield Wilkinson and Ayn Rand Ferrer as Kay, and Masashi Fujimoto as Tatsuo. The critical reaction for the Old Globe production in 2012, critics felt the subject was important, but that the show required better execution. Writing for the Los Angeles Times, Anne-Marie Welsh concluded that the show needs a sharper emotional focus and musical edge to match its bold subject. For the San Diego Reader, critic Jeff Smith wrote, "Right now, Allegiance is at best an important musical, but it needs a great deal of rethinking and reshaping to become a good one." Critical reception for the Broadway production was mixed. While the cast was often praised, especially Takei's characterization and Salonga's singing, the reviews frequently criticized poor execution of a worthy subject, especially in the lyrics. Linda Weiner in Newsday commented that the musical carries its heavy baggage with surprising lightness of spirit. The show has fully developed characters, a strong cast, and a new story to tell in an old-fashioned way. The San Diego Union Tribune, having reviewed the original production at the Old Globe in 2012, was more positive, feeling that the new production retains both its powerful story core and a good deal of its lush and melodic score, along with nearly all the top cast members from the original version. I'm going to leave out the rest of the reviews because there were quite a lot. But that's also quite interesting to kind of look up and read. A lot of them pretty much say the same thing. Really amazing performances, but the content, although important to learn about, also needs to be entertaining, and it just simply wasn't. So here's my hot takes, because y'all, I gotta have them. I kind of agree with the critics. I love the idea of telling the story. It's an incredibly important, especially in today's climate, that Americans know our history so that we may not repeat it. Having said that, although there were definitely moments that I became emotional while watching this on stage, I couldn't really tell you what those moments are now. I'm left with a lingering impression of relationships, but no concrete memories. I guess I do recall having a conversation with the person that I saw the show with, and both of us feeling just slightly disappointed that we could see the potential, but despite some really stellar performances, we couldn't quite scratch that emotional itch. Again, I'm going to talk fast because I know this episode is going to be like 3 hours long. I want to finish this by including these thoughts of Frank Abe, the creator and the documentary film creator of the documentary film Conscience and the Constitution. This is written of him on resistors.com. Frank Abe is the lead author of a new graphic novel on Japanese American resistance to wartime incarceration, We Hereby Refuse. A finalist in creative nonfiction for the Washington State Book Awards, he won an American Book Award for John Okada, the life and rediscovered work of the author of No No Boy. It was co-edited by Greg Robinson and Floyd Chung. and made the award-winning PBS documentary called Conscience and the Constitution on the largest organized camp resistance. He's also co-editing an anthology with Chung for Penguin Classics on the literature of Japanese American incarceration, which is due to come out in 2024. So, in his words, the story of the musical takes some liberties with history. It conflates Heart Mountain with the worst of the segregation center at Tule Lake and invents military rule at Heart Mountain. The processing of new arrivals is embellished for dramatic effect, as handcuffs and physical abuse by military police was not reported in the internment camps. Abe comments that the resistance by the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee was a studied act of civil disobedience, not a gang of fist-raised revolutionaries. He notes no firearms were used inside the camp's perimeter. The resistance was open and above board, its meetings open to the public. No one had to run or hide. Leaders of the Fair Play Committee were quietly taken into custody at their family barracks. The resistors knew they risked 5 years in prison for bucking the draft, but violating the Selective Service Act was never a capital crime, never treason. Abe objects to the portrayal of the activities and the treatment of the resistors and to the relentless optimism of the score, concluding that the show distorts the historical lesson and diminishes the real impact of the anger and the suppressed rage. I thought that was interesting to include. All right.
Something that I'm really fascinated about is Lea Salonga is a Filipino actress.
Yeah.
And my grandparents and my mom were born in the Philippines, and my grandparents lived through the Japanese occupation of Manila. And I'm curious if Lea's family would have also been in the Philippines at that time. And I'm curious what it was like for her to tell a story about the other side of it, the internment of Japanese citizens in the US, and for her having a career in the US and the Philippines. Like I'm very curious about like her own personal history and how that intertwines into the story.
Yeah, that would have been fascinating.
So multifaceted.
And there you have it, guys.
Amazing.
Thanks. It was very long-winded. I'm very good at that.
I also want to add, when the film came out, when Fathom Events released Allegiance, it was the highest grossing performance film that Fathom Events had until Newsies came out the following year, and then that broke the records. But it was hugely popular, and it's still available to stream on Broadway On Demand and Broadway HD, and people want this content.
Yeah.
And I think the film has helped generate a following for the musical, because it was so short-lived on Broadway that it's important that we have this capture that people are able to access, and whether it's contested history or not, like they're able to access the story.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Pamela. That was great.
Sure.
Well, it's me, and I promise y'all we won't be super long here for this one. So my show, as we stated at the beginning of this episode, is called Showgirl. It's from 1961. Please do not confuse it with Showgirls. If you Google it, if you search it, no S, and it's 2 words. So maybe that will also help you. My resources are On the Record from playbill.com, article written by Steve Suskin from August of 2009, the complete book of 1960s musicals by Dan Dietz, the book Jerry Herman, Poet of the Show Tune by Stephen Citron, the book Open a New Window, the Broadway musicals in the 1960s by Ethan Morden, Wikipedia, and also the Filmed Live Musicals website. So that's where I got my information for this one. Showgirl 1961. Okay, so now this show was a vehicle for the one, the only Carol Channing. Carol Channing had just played Lorelei Lee on Broadway in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes from 1949 to 1953. She played the role that Marilyn Monroe later made famous with the film version, singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. Carol Channing was cast against type, and Marilyn Monroe was cast to type. I mean, I would have loved to see Carol Channing play this part. She is hilarious. Now, okay, hot take. Her voice is a little much for me sometimes. But like she's funny. She's really, really funny.
She's hilarious.
She's so funny. And so I feel sad that like I wish that the movie industry had a little you know, imagination and had let her do it. But you know, here we are. And I love Marilyn. I do.
Totally.
Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing Marilyn Monroe, but like it would have been really fun to see Carol do it in the movie. But Carol's run was so successful, she went on tour filling houses across the country playing Lorelei Lee. After her run in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Carol went on to do Wonderful Town on the road, filling the role made iconic by Rosalind Russell, who played Ruth Sherwood in the film version of the play My Sister Eileen, before playing the role on Broadway in the musical. But unfortunately, Carol found that audiences were still expecting her to be Lorelei. In order to step out of being pigeonholed, she did the show The Vamp in 1955, which was a musical about the silent film era. It was quite opulent. I read, but not great. People felt like it was very pompous. And so the show, therefore, didn't find an audience, and it closed quite quickly after only a 7-week run at the Winter Garden Theater. At that point, not only did The Vamp end, but so did Carol's marriage to co-producer on the show, Alex Carson. She then married television producer Charles Lowe, who was also her manager and publisher in 1956, and Charles arranged several nightclub bookings for her to tour around the country. So the nightclub act she had was called Show Business. The songs and sketches were written by Charles Gaynor. Charles had written a musical called, I have it here, Lend an Ear, that she was also in. He did the music, book, and lyrics for that show also. And that show was a big deal for Carol's career also. And so my guess is she probably felt really comfortable with him doing something for her. Show Business opened in San Francisco at the Curran Theater in 1959. It's spelled Curran. So that's Curran, who knows? But again, it's spelled Curran, and it's still a working theater. This show was a satirical review and retrospective, and it ran across the country for 14 months. So a lot of times when we talk about shows on our podcast, they don't have any time to like try out. Like that is 90% of the shows on our podcast is like the kiss of death. Like we know if there was no proper tryout, where the show is like doesn't have a great chance of doing very well. That's what we've learned here, and we talk about it often. Although the show was predominantly a one-woman show, it also starred Wally Griffin, who was her counterpart in the comedic sketches, and the French singing quartet, which, okay, side note, I think you all know this. Me speaking French is a hilarious joke among my friends. And so I'm going to try and say this, but I promise you I will butcher it, and I'm very sorry to the people of France. Okay, so the quartet is Les Quoi J'ai Dit, which I read
pretty good to me.
Okay, I've said it and it's out there. Many places said this translated as 4 Thursdays. They also had a nickname. Okay, here we go with this nickname. I'm gonna try to do it.
Hit me.
Les Comédiens de la Chanson. I don't know. I'm hoping that's how you say that.
It's a very Americanized version of French.
It totally is. I've warned you all beforehand, and this is where we're at. Okay. Members of the group were Raoul Correa, André Fuma, George Dennis, Raoul Bousserie, and then later Roger Legier. And so this same crew, this band, they also came with her as it transferred. So on the Film Live Musicals website, It says, after appearing on the George Burns show in January of 1959, Channing shared she was developing a new Broadway-bound act and noted, "An act is a great thing for a TV guest. It gives you lots of polished new material, which can be conveniently divided into short segments." Channing also recognized that one night on television could give a performer as much exposure as a long-running Broadway show. So this was a big deal. This was a big deal for her. This was her really trying to show what she could do and her range and not be stuck in just like everyone just seeing her as this like one thing. And like we all know now that like Carol Channing could do pretty much whatever she wanted. But every actor, I feel, especially actors who get well known for something, they always have like this moment of reckoning where they have to like figure out how to pivot. One actor I will say I feel like has done a marvelous job of this, and it and started out in a role that is like mammoth, is Harry Potter. I just forgot his name. Daniel Radcliffe.
Daniel Radcliffe.
Yeah, like
I couldn't get off the mute button fast enough.
I mean, like he really, like it had to be so difficult to not be seen as this character, and he's really done a good job. So so many actors have this pivot they have to make.
Well, he did a show that was like required his nudity. I think that's ultimately what
Yeah.
was like the dividing line.
Yeah. He did. On January 11th, 1961, Show Business, which was expanded and the name changed to become Showgirl, transferred to the Eugene O'Neill Theater. The show had 2 preview performances. Jules Minchin, who was better known on the Broadway stage for shows such as Call Me Mr., replaced Wally. Showgirl, although never having much to do with the Ziegfeld Follies, did take aim at the shows of the day and their cliches. For example, Carol used songs from the spoof musical Gladiola Girl and had similar songs from fake musicals. She also imitated many performers, and her most celebrated imitation was Marlene Dietrich. Okay, I'm going to read something from the Complete Book of Musicals from the 1960s, particularly about that. All right, so some people thought her portrayal was a devastating, take no prisoners take on Marlene Dietrich. This is the Walter Kerr review from the New York Herald Tribune. He suggested that here the devil himself colluded with Channing as Dietrich. It's hauled kicking to the block. A low-budget biblical spoof in which Carol Channing and Minchin make a down payment on an ark. Oh, this is another sketch. Sorry. So in another sketch, which I think is hysterical, people didn't like it, but I think this premise sounds hysterical. So Carol Channing and Minchin, they make a down payment on an ark in order to keep up with their neighbors, the Noahs. I think that's hysterical. I would watch that. A spoof on a silent screen star who likes singing in the rains, Lena Lamont, has major problems adjusting to the talkies. And Channing and Minchin as the Lunts, okay, who become involved in housekeeping issues surrounding the new theater named after them. I mean, that's hysterical. And people were like, people didn't love, but I think that would be hysterical. I would watch that. All right, and so Showgirl opened on January 12th of 1961 and played for 100 performances until it closed on April 8th of 1961. Carol Channing was nominated for a Tony Award for Best Performance by a leading actress in a musical. This is also from Film Live Musicals. In the final week of the Broadway run, Showgirl became the first Broadway musical to be broadcast in its entirety on an early form of pay TV in Etobicoke? Is that how you pronounce it,
Your guess is
Luisa?
as good as mine. Apologies, Toronto.
I know. I'm like Montreal, Toronto.
Yeah.
It is, I'm sure, a very lovely city in Canada. Yes. Following the Broadway run, Showgirl was performed in various cities along the East Coast of the United States. The show continued to garner glowing reviews Writing for the Pittsburgh Press, Michael Holmberg enthused that the show was a 2-hour delight and that Miss Channing is a marvel with an apparently limitless supply of impressions and parodies of the foibles of the theater and its people. Holmberg also praised La Quajadie, noting the quartet act as well as they sing pantomime excellently and have an infection, and I think it's supposed to be infectious spirit of wit and good cheer. Roulette Records released an original cast recording on LP in 1961, and it was re-released by Forum Records in 1963, and Kreuzerlin released the recording on CD in 2009. That is Showgirl. Very brief, but you all can see it on Film Live Musicals in the database. There is a link right there. You can actually watch her be brilliant, be absolutely brilliant. I suggest that you do it. She's funny.
I
She's
love
so
Carol
funny.
Channing. It's so, and it is really interesting because I remember seeing her for the very first time in shoot, what's the one, the Broadway show with Sutton Foster?
A Thoroughly Modern Millie.
Thoroughly Modern Millie. Oh my God! Like I don't even know why that
got an Oscar nomination for that role. Yeah,
and she was brilliant, right?
Yeah,
and then next time I saw her, I was expecting this same character, and it was probably like an earlier movie where she was singing, and I was like, oh Lord. But
my brain went to when you said Broadway show with Sutton Foster. I was like, Carol Channing wasn't in Little Women, but that would be a very different casting to have Carol Channing as Marmee.
Carol Channing as Jo.
Or the grandmother.
Yeah.
Holy geez.
Aunt March.
Oh,
Brilliant.
Aunt March, that's right. Mm-hmm. Oh dear.
Actually, she would be a really good Aunt March.
Oh, yeah, it's it a lot of reviews said that it felt more like a cabaret show, which it was. So
Sure.
I don't know.
Well, that was her
I'm like,
intent.
that's not saying anything. Anything, right. That's what it was. So but they took that, I guess as a knock because it was so small. But what's funny, is I feel like nowadays, like I think of title of show where like the whole premise is like 4 actors and a keyboard. So it's like it being a small, intimate piece was like a big deal in 1961. And now we're like, yeah, 4 chairs and a keyboard. That's right. I mean, we're all used to that now.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, when she did the other show, Vamp.
Too opulent.
Yeah. So it's like, what do you want? What do you want? Pick one.
Can't win.
I don't know.
Nobody can win.
No.
It's a business that's already set against you, no matter who you are.
Even if you're legendary Carol Channing.
Right. I mean,
I just want to
she
add
was made legendary.
Oh, please. Yeah.
Oh, just that the broadcast in Etobicoke, I'm sorry, Toronto, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, to the citizens of Etobicoke, that even though it was so small, like less than 6,000 homes had access to this broadcast, but it was popular enough that they re-aired it. And then they added Toronto to the North American tour. It wasn't initially on the tour. And then they added that as a tour stop after that broadcast because of the broadcast.
Oh, wow.
And even in that limited, it's pay TV wasn't a thing yet. It's still an experiment, essentially. Like people put money literally into the TV, into a box to access content. Like and this is 1962 or 1961. It's like, decades before we think of when pay TV is being accessible.
Yeah.
And there was all this, and it was, even though it was only available in this one tiny place, newspapers commented it across the country. Like it was news in newspapers across the US that this was happening, and there was division as to whether or not, should we be filming live theater? Is it going to affect ticket sales at the box office? That perennial concern. But even then, even in this early form, it boosted ticket sales, and it added a whole tour stop that wouldn't have happened without the broadcast. So I think, like, we have evidence right from the beginning that filming musicals is not going to affect ticket sales, and it only helps shows on the road.
Yeah. Well,
one of my one of my good friends is he's a huge advocate for recording theatrical content because he says all the time, he's like, I mean, for example, what's happening right now, and he would have said this of other concerts, but he's like, Beyonce and Taylor Swift, right? Right now, like it's going into movie theaters, and all that's going to do is because I believe, I'm not a Swiftie, but what I hear is that like she's not going to Europe yet or something. And so they're saying like they wonder if this being broadcast in movie theaters is going to sort of amp up her profile and make it so that that's probably more likely that she'll end up doing like, if she's not doing any stops in Europe, do some, and if she's only doing a few, maybe expand. I mean, just to Luisa's point, like we keep having this conversation in the theater world, and it's like we have several places where we can look at the data and see that this fear is a farce.
Yes.
And all it does is help the industry. But here we are constantly in this conversation.
And we had this conversation when radio was afraid that movies were going to be taking over. Yeah. And then we had this conversation when movie theaters were afraid that TV was going to be taking over. And then we've had this conversation over and over again. And it's always been proven that, okay, yeah, you might have a realistic fear, but it didn't prove. So relax, right?
Yeah. And in fact, there's a wonderful new book by Doug Reside, who is the curator of the Billy Rose Theater Division at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. My God, that is a mouthful. But he has a new book called Fixing the Musical: How Technologies Have Shaped the Broadway Repertory. And it is a history of how cast recordings of musicals on TV, musicals on film, on VHS, and did I mention cast recordings? How that have shaped how popular musicals have become. So for example, the Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals were in the canon of shows, sorry, not the canon, he uses specifically the word repertory, that shows that regional companies and high schools produce over and over again because people had access to them. They knew the films of Rodgers and Hammerstein. And then the same is going when Hamilton becomes available to license. Every man in every school, forever is going to be doing Hamilton. It's musicals that are available to the general public in an accessible format are what people want to perform and see because it's what they know. And 100%. So shows that more than ever post-pandemic, shows that aren't filming and making themselves available to the general public are going to fall out of the consciousness.
Right. Well, growing up in the Midwest, the closest place that I had to travel to in order to see live theater on a professional level was Chicago. It was a 3-hour drive. And occasionally we would have school trips up to see Rent. Why did we watch Rent and Les Mis? But it wasn't something that was always accessible to us. So what I had was the CD store and the cassette tape store where I could go and I could read the backs and think, oh, this musical sounds awesome. I'll take this home and listen to it. And then I was enamored of those musicals, and that made me want to see them. But it's really interesting how that kind of falsehood still persists. That fear still persists. It's really odd.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that phrase. That fear is a farce. I want to put that on a t-shirt or something.
Yes. Fear is a farce.
Ticket cannibalization. That fear is a farce.
And that farce is not fierce. Oh, that was dumb, but I like it.
Well, this was a super fun episode. I learned a ton. Thank you so much, Luisa, because it was really fun to learn so much about these musicals being recorded and the backstory. And you all, if you're not already listening to Film Live Musicals, the podcast, I very much recommend that you do. Because you're going to be able to meet some of the people that made these things happen. including you was it the producer from Great Performances, the woman who started Great Performances?
Oh
I feel
no,
like
well I just interviewed Ellen Krass, who
yes.
is responsible for filming Sunday in the Park with George, Sweeney Todd, the New York Philharmonic Company, Sweeney Todd with the New York Phil, and the oh no, sorry, she did the San Francisco Philharmonic. So she's responsible for all these incredible recordings that are like historic and like were people's gateway into musical theater. And she, you know, cataloged so much of Sondheim's work, or sorry, filmed so much of Sondheim's work.
That's
And
awesome.
she's the reason that we have those recordings. And so it was, and she inspired the whole website. So I was really, really thrilled to talk to her.
I bet you were just geeking all over the place.
Oh my God, I was melting. And I'm dying to do a follow-up because she has decades of experience working in film and TV and theater, and we barely touched the shows themselves. And I'm like, okay, we need to do a follow-up to talk about the actual shows, but her experience and her knowledge is unbelievable. So that will be coming out soon, actually, that we just finishing up the finishing touches on that episode.
Awesome.
And I can't wait to
I'm
release it.
so excited about that episode because I feel like we talked about that in person. I think you were trying to get her, like you were working on that. And it's like, I mean, Pamela and I talk about Great Performances all the time because that's all we had when we were kids.
Yep.
There was no YouTube when we were kids. Like there were none of these different ways to watch shows that you have now. All we had was PBS, Great Performances, and Theater Talk, which was also on PBS. And so I would stay up until when we interviewed Michael Riedel, and I was like, I would stay up until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning just to watch you and Susan. When I was a kid, my mom would be like, go to bed. And I was like, but Mom, Theater Talk's on. I have to stay up.
Yes.
And she was like, fair enough.
Yep. It was that and Great Performances, man. That's what I had.
Do you know, and I also just remembered, oh, I'm sorry. I just remembered a radio program on NPR on Sundays in the middle of the afternoon. I think it started at 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. where they just played musical theater. Like that was, I just released that little memory.
Love that.
I would love David Horn, who's the executive producer at Great Performances. He is someone who I would love to pick his brain. And Jacques Venza, who is the founder of that program. There are two people who I would love to get in a room with. And
oh heck yeah,
tell me, spill your knowledge.
That would be amazing. Well, I'm still really excited about this upcoming episode that you have, because I mean, she really her work is it's definitely influenced, you know, me, and so that's just so inspiring to be able to talk to somebody like that, because they're the reason that we got to watch anything.
Yeah, and she's the reason. I'll very quickly, I know we have to wrap up, but when I was studying at Central in London at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and I was going to write my thesis on I had a memory pop up yesterday that I was frustrated about studying Australian musical theatre history from London because all the resources I needed were on the other side of the planet. And then I went to a screening of Company, filmed with the New York Philharmonic, starring Patti LuPone and Neil Patrick Harris and Stephen Colbert, and an amazing all-star cast. And in a pre-taped interview before the screening, Ellen Krass talked about how she couldn't get funding to film this musical because no one had heard of filming a live musical. Really? And I sat up in my seat and I was like, didn't these people grow up watching Into the Woods on VHS and Victoria? Like,
right, same.
And I was like really baffled by this whole thing. And so I went in the next day and I changed my thesis topic to the history of film live musicals. Wow. And that's what I did my thesis on. And then I moved to the US, and very shortly after was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. And I couldn't go to the theater. I was immune compromised. I wasn't able to go to the theater in person, which was like absolutely devastating. And I decided to turn my research into a website, and that's how Film Live Musicals was born. And wow, I never would have imagined, like over a decade later, that the pandemic exploded what was available. And like I said at the beginning, we're in the golden age of Film Live Musicals because we have more content than ever before that is like purposefully being filmed and purposely marketed and released, and it's very exciting and overwhelming.
Oh yeah, it's super exciting. I think that's a great note to end on. Fantastic.
I do too. That was great. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
I'm so happy we finally got to do this. So everyone, listen to Film Live Musicals, the podcast. Go to the website, check out the database, find a bunch of the shows we've talked about here on Theatre Geeks Anonymous. And you know, you can always email us. You know where to find everyone. We'll see you later.
These are a few of my favorite things.
Okay, this is a segment on Film Live Musicals that I call My Favorite Things, where I ask my favorite questions. First up, what is your favorite musical?
Oh, they're like my children. It's so hard to answer this question.
It usually is for me, but I think I'm still on Hamilton. It's chestnut checkers, like he says all the time. And I feel like every time I listen to it, every time I see it, I unpack another thing. I'm also very excited to see, as my, niece and nephews get older, them like realizing like the deeper meaning of certain things, and also understanding the significance that like they just get to see people who look like them play these roles. Like they don't know a world where it wasn't like that. That's massive. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's also like that for Annie, because I introduced her to the Black Annie first.
Yeah.
So she has no concept. There was never a white one. There was never a black one.
Yeah.
And so it's like things like that really make me excited about the future. But that's my thing. Yeah.
I can't answer that question. I never can. But like the kinds of musicals that I love so much are the ones that strike an emotional chord enough that when I sing it, I can just take on that character immediately. So like Into the Woods is definitely one of those shows. Little Women is another one of those shows that I love so much. And like comedy wise, you can even go to another Sutton Foster show that we already talked about.
Thoroughly Modern Millie.
What's wrong with me today? Thoroughly Modern Millie. Like all of those shows that even if it's a comedy can strike that kind of emotional chord with you. Anyway, those are my favorites.
What about Parade? You talk about Parade incessantly. Yeah.
Parade is one of those that it strums that emotional chord so very, very intricately.
Yeah.
You like my poetry? Yeah. No, I love those kind of shows. And the ones that are just like slightly dark, like any of the Sondheim shows, any of the Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, because they're slightly dark, hidden under the guise of musical theater, but like it's just a little bit like there's a dark nuance.
Love that. What is your favorite filmed live musical?
Okay, I'm gonna go back to Les Mis. It's the concert version because it's
the 10th anniversary or the 25th?
The 10th. So with Lea Salonga, Michael Ball, I think, was in it. Colm Wilkinson. Yes. It was so.
And then I love when they're all singing at the finale. Do you hear the people sing in multiple languages?
It's so beautiful. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. That one was really informative to my. It not only validated my love of musical theater, but it spurred it on in a way that really created the opportunities that I took advantage of in my early 20s to like come to Chicago and then move to New York and then like go and audition for these things. Like I really loved that one. What about you, Ebony?
I'm thinking really hard, and I don't know. I don't know.
Do you want to answer Hamilton again?
No, that's not my favorite filmed. I don't know. This is what I'm going to say. The thing that got me excited about filmed live musicals is the Into the Woods with Bernadette Peters. Yeah. That's what got me excited about them.
Okay.
I'm not going to say that's my favorite one, but I was like, you can do this? I mean, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
okay. So now I have to
say.
interject again, and Ebony and I have talked about this, but to talk about like informative things. Into the Woods. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. When I was 10 years old, I did.
We don't know how to do lightning, Luisa. I'm so sorry.
I live for this. This is my favorite.
So when I was 10 years old, I was doing a community players was the community theater in Bloomington Normal. I was doing a community players version of Peter Pan where I played Toodles, and my best friend at the time was the girl that played Smee. And we went over to her house one day because we were playing or whatever. And I was talking about Broadway and I was talking about how I just loved theater and I loved musical theater and I loved singing and performing. And she goes, "Oh, yeah." And then I looked over on her dresser and there was a headshot. And I looked, I was like, "Oh my God, she is beautiful. Who is that?" And she goes, "Okay, come with me." And we ran down to her living room and she put in this VHS tape and Into the Woods started playing. That headshot was Bernadette Peters. That is what decided me to become a Broadway star.
That's amazing.
I know.
Amazing.
My heart.
I know. Oh, it was amazing. Like that. Yes. But like, because I always knew I wanted to be an actress, but I didn't know in what capacity. So she did it.
I think, I think for like Sweeney Todd was very, very influential, the capture with Angela Lansbury and George Hearn. But I think Into the Woods for millennials is like the gateway drug.
Yeah.
It was the first.
It's true. It's so good.
So a filmed live musical is not exactly a stage show and it's not exactly a film. So what should we call it?
A flage musical. Wait. A stilm?
Oh, a stilm.
A slewsicle. Slewsicle.
Oh, I like slewsicle. Sounds like Susicle. That's cute.
Very 1,000 years ago, I had a podcast with a friend in Australia called Flusicle. Her name was Flick and I'm Lou. And so it was Flusicle and it was a musical about Australian musical theater that very short-lived in the very early days of podcasts.
Love. So cute.
Wouldn't it be funny if it did end up being called a Flusicle? That would be very deep in my history. Where do you stand on bootlegs?
Okay, so I did have some bootlegs growing up, but only because I couldn't access it otherwise.
Yeah.
I think if we had more of a catalog of filmed stage musicals, flusicles, if you will, then I would have probably watched those over the bootlegs. However, I think after watching these bootlegs and seeing that the quality was just terrible, that was when I was kind of like, I'd rather just, I guess, wait, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so I don't necessarily, and also this is hard too, because like I'm a performer. So the last thing I want to see when I look out into the sea of audiences is a lit up face because they're holding their cell phone out and recording what we're doing on stage. There is a disconnect between what you're witnessing as an audience member and what we're doing on stage as performers when you put a device in front of you. So it's difficult. And it's also hard because being part of the union, there are, we are paid a certain amount because we have the leverage in order to ask for that. And so because bootlegs exist, we don't necessarily have full leverage anyway. So I'm mixed. I have watched them, but I don't necessarily like them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly. I'm not a performer, but the thing that I have found helpful is like in doing this podcast, shows like Legs Diamond that we talked about. And I found this super ratty. Honest to God, I saw it and I was like, I don't even know how this was done because video cameras were so huge. Like, how did you do this? And so I wouldn't have been able to see any of it if it weren't for that bootleg. And mind you, the bootleg, it was very ratty. It was terrible quality, but Peter's gone.
Yeah.
And he loved that show. So I think my feeling is that we need to dispense with this fear that recording musicals and plays is going to hurt the production and do it so we don't need bootlegs and we can have high quality captures of these performances because people leave us.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's not
they
just
put
for
their heart and
entertainment.
soul, blood, sweat, and tears into something.
Yes.
And it should be able to be left behind when they leave us.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, like you talked about, we were talking about Showgirl earlier, that like this amazing performer who is so versatile that we have surprisingly little video footage of her. That we have this record of one of her early Broadway shows, like how important that we're not just documenting the show, we're documenting history.
That's right.
And
That's
performances and people, and it's there's so many facets to it.
And it does really hurt my heart a little bit to think about how many shows have disappeared from existence because we don't have a record of them.
Yeah,
exactly. What stage musicals, speaking of, do you wish had been filmed?
Oh, my biggest one that I know what I'm gonna say. I am so pissed about what happened to Shuffle Along. I'm so pissed. There's no cast recording. There's no video capture. And that cast was bonkers. And the story is extraordinarily important for U.S. history, Black history. I mean, it's a piece of our Black history we didn't even know about. And we wouldn't have known if it weren't for the luminous George C. Wolfe being like, I need to educate my people.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, that is the one that like there's no record of. And the whole premise of his version of the show was that like the original Shuffle Along, he was afraid like what went into that would be forgotten. And here we have this new production from 2016 and nobody has any capture of the music or the show. And I can't. So that's what I get upset about. And that's what I wish had been captured.
Amen.
Sorry, I had to mute it for a second.
Okay.
So, and I don't think that this exists. If it does, I'm sure you can let me know. But the original version of this show, Sideshow, was one of those CDs that I went to a store and I looked at the back and I looked at the cover and I kind of like was like, yeah, that looks really awesome. And so I listened to incessantly when I first got it. And it was also one of those shows where I could put it together on stage in my own head, but it was always one of those shows where I was like, oh, but what did they actually do? Like, how did they create this Siamese twins kind of thing? And you saw it a little bit on the Tony Awards, but not nearly. Like, I wanted to see the actual thing on stage. I think that would have been really cool.
Yeah.
And I did. I ended up seeing it in its second rendition while it was on stage, but like I would still love to see the original because it was a little bit different.
Yes. Oh, such good choices. And finally, I wanted to add, there's an amazing book by Cassine Gaines. I was just looking up the new title because he re-released it. It was originally called Footnotes, and now it's called When Broadway Was Black. And it's a history of Shuffle Along and how it all came together. And it's a really great book. I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And finally, what stage musicals would you like to see filmed in the future?
All of them.
Yeah. For real. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that, again, I go back to being an auntie a lot because they're the next generation I'm trying to influence to become as theater geeky as me. And I know I'm going to succeed with at least one of them. And I want things to be much more accessible for them on an economic level, on a location level, thankfully as of right now, like none of them have disabilities, but like who's to say if that's going to continue? They're little, like anything can happen. And so I just want us to be in a place where theater can be seen by everyone and not just a select few. So I'm with Pamela on all of them.
Yeah. And for the same reason too, we talk about this incessantly on our own podcast, but theater should be accessible because it is a mirror in society, right? It is what is put on stage, what is happening in the day that is important to learn from and move on from. Like, not every single musical is like that, but political is always kind of a there's always an underline of the political climate in every musical, right? Or in every show, in every TV show, in every movie, across the genre. And so because it is so inaccessible for a large portion of the United States, certainly, and globally, of course, because if Broadway was far away from me when I was growing up in the Midwest, it is that, I mean, how far away are you from New York City when you were living in Australia? Do you know? So,
Yeah. I mean, Broadway may as well have been the moon. Like it was just this like faraway place that like magical land.
Completely. Well, and that's kind of how I felt about it too. It was like this dream that like, oh, to be a Broadway star like that, it's never going to happen because it's so far away. It's such a weird thing to think about that now when I'm living 45 minutes away, but on a train. I guess I could get there quicker in a car. But anyway, so it's become inaccessible, based on proximity, but also I live 45 minutes away on the train and I have to really pick and choose which shows I go and see because of money. So that's another inaccessibility to Broadway. So you have cut off the access to such a large portion of people based on proximity and money alone, just those two. And those people aren't going to come and see your show, regardless of whether you film it or not. So if you did film it, you would open access to people that would never alternatively be able to or want to come to see your show.
Yeah.
Amen.
Mic drop.
Visit
But I won't drop because it's very
to learn more.
Yes. Oh, that's
Thank you so
interesting.
much. That's always so much fun for me, and you both delivered.
So fun. I love it.
Okay. Do you have like a signature ending that you do, Luisa, or anything?
I have pre-recorded stuff also, so
cool.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna hit stop.
The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by your host, Luisa Lyons. FilmedLiveMusicals.com features information on nearly 200 filmed stage musicals from around the world and dating back to 1938, a weekly newsletter with upcoming streams, and this very podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and make sure to sign up for the weekly newsletter to have upcoming streams delivered straight to your inbox. Filmed Live Musicals is financially supported by Josh Brandon, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Andy Capone, Elliot Charles, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Hannah Graneman, James T. Lane, Jim McCarthy, Allison Matthews, Al Monaco, David Negrin, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Joe Tillotson, and Beck Twist. If you would also like to support the preservation of the history of film stage musicals and the creation of one easy place to find them all, you can now make a tax-deductible donation to Filmed Live Musicals via The Field. Visit filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.